Ibowan Vanaka. Did I pronounce it right? Yeah. I have a cheering squad here, the ISG of GPPAC is present. Anyway, once upon a time, a long, long time ago, I had long, black, curly hair. I fancied myself like Che Guevara, who believed that a true revolutionary was guided by ridiculous feelings of love. Or John Lennon, who imagined that there was no heaven or no countries to kill or die for, and no religions too. So, when the Jesuits in my high school, where I studied, imposed a policy of sporting a clear, short, military-style haircut, we all, of course, protested and walked out of our classrooms and conducted a strike outside the school. We were raising our fists and flailing, raising our voices, and even, of course, upped our middle fingers at the Jesuits' faces. Yeah. We were even emboldened when the police came. We didn't care. We were all young, restless, and wild. But the priests had a secret weapon. Guess what? They called our parents. And our parents arrived, and they dragged us, some of us literally by our ears, back to the classrooms as they were crying, "What wrong did we do in raising this child of ours?" Anyway, that incident was the only and shortest strike in the annals of that high school. But that episode somehow defined my life, and in a way also my baptism of activism. So when the dictator Ferdinand Marcos imposed martial law in the Philippines just before I graduated high school, I was already ripe for serious activism. So I was tasked by the movement to organize students, lawyers, artists, professionals, opposition politicians, entrepreneurs, the so-called middle forces, who had to join the vanguard or the basic forces of peasants and workers and the urban poor that led the broad anti-dictatorship movement against Marcos. But comrades and friends fell along the way, close friends were either arrested, imprisoned, tortured, went missing, brutally killed while we struggled against the dictatorship. But we eventually ousted Marcos because of that massive spirit and broad front that we organized. And thanks to support from the international community. So when we ousted Marcos, I personally at that time felt that we also had to thank those abroad who supported us and share our experiences to those who were still struggling against tyranny, oppression in the world. There was still apartheid in South Africa. There was tyranny in Nicaragua and El Salvador. Palestine and East Timor was still being occupied. Repression was going on in Burma. There was civil war in Sri Lanka. So I dedicated my life to become a solidarity activist, to launch South-South solidarity. In fact, one of my Sri Lankan friends, who's here today, Freddie Amage, was one of our interns before in the Philippines. And if you look at the Guinness Book of Records, he is the most deported person in the world because of his advocacy for East Timor. So that was our life, that was my life. But in 2000, then President Joseph Estrada of the Philippines launched an all-out war in Mindanao, where I lived, against the Moro Islamic Liberation Front that was waging a war, but had a ceasefire and an ongoing peace process with the government. But that all-out war, of course, again, killed hundreds of combatants and civilians and displaced thousands. And it behooved me, while I was working in solidarity with others beyond our borders, just right in my backyard, there was suffering, and there was oppression, and there was tyranny again, and I was there outside working for solidarity of others. Not that I forgot what was happening at home, but because we ousted Marcos already, we wanted to share what we had. But I realized that we had to combine the micro and the macro. We had to combine what was local to global, so to speak. And so we responded to that situation. The president, that Estrada, his troops overran the main camp of the Moro Front. He was a former movie action star. After overrunning the camp, he helicoptered to the camp in battle fatigues and insensitively brought cases of beer and roasted pig to feast and celebrate outside the mosque in the camp. Can you imagine what war again had to be waged as a result of that sheer insensitivity? And so I started to also at that time muse that why is it when war is waged by both government and rebels, it is waged in the name of the people. But the people are the ones who suffer most, are the victims of the conflict. And when they wage or conduct peace talks, it is also done in the name of the people. But the people oftentimes don't feel that they are in the table. So I got my inspiration from this situation. From a solidarity activist, I slowly evolved also into a peace builder. And so I get inspiration from the victims of war, of armed conflict, the refugees, the displaced, the orphans, the widows, the IDPs. They are the ones who mold and guide my discourse and mine and my cohorts' work in peace building as we collectively try to craft a people's peace agenda to accompany the peace process or influence the peace process. So in 2014, we had a friendlier government to the peace process. There was already a peace pact was achieved. was inked. All what was needed was a bill, a law to implement the pact, to implement the agreement. And it was a cinch that it was going to breeze through Congress because the president was supporting it and he was very popular at that time. But it went on and it grinded on. But in January 2015, just as the deliberation on the bill was about to close, something unfortunate happened. A bungled police operation that was out to capture a high-value Malaysian terrorist, allegedly hiding at the fringe of the camp of the Moro Front, resulted into the death of 44 police commandos. The ceasefire protocol was that any movement of the troops from the government or the MILF had to be coordinated with each other. But the police general in charge of this mission decided not to coordinate and even kept the government's army in the dark. So what ensued was a firefight between the special forces and the MILF in the camp because they didn't know that there was this mission and they were creeping in the dark, armed to the teeth, and thus the massacre happened. It was then known as the Mamasapano massacre. 44 police, special forces killed. When the news broke out the next day, and the images of the bloodbath went viral, the aftermath was loud and ugly. The Filipino majority people, mostly Christians or Catholics, called for an all-out war against the front in particular and the Muslim population in general. The latent bigotry, prejudice that was underneath suddenly exploded again with a nasty vengeance. And again, calls for this all-out war punctured the air. The bill that was in Congress was practically dead in the water. So what to do? What, as peace builders, did we have to do? What call, what plea, what plan, what prayer can we offer in the midst of this rhetoric, in the midst of this rising decibel of prejudice, of bigotry, of hate that was again sweeping the land? It didn't come to me in a bolt of lightning or as an eureka moment, but after consultations with fellow peace builders, but more so with the victims of war, those still in the refugee camps, those who were victims of this latest atrocity. Voila, all-out peace was the counterpoint to the all-out war rhetoric that was permeating the air. So, all-out peace, we launched an all-out peace campaign, calling first for calm, sobriety, and of course, justice for those who were killed in the Mamasapano massacre. Not only the 44, there were also 15 Mujahideen who were killed, and a number of civilians too, which the public, of course, forgot, and they just focused on the 44. So we called for that as we conducted dialogues, healing sessions, rituals, all around the country where we had constituents. We called for a day of prayer, for truth, for reconciliation, for justice, to honor those who fell, but also to look at the bigger picture, that how do we avoid a recurrence of that incident? and in fact, to honor that a peace process that was slowly building such conditions already. So that was what we were doing at that time. Alas, still it was not enough because Congress didn't pass the bill. Even if the then president was already lame duck, still pushed for it. Fast forward, we have a new government in place. It seems to be friendlier to the peace process, notwithstanding its current credentials on human rights, which is another story to tell, another Hague Talks talk maybe. But even then, last week, the bill was resurrected and it passed Congress. But the game is not over. It's still in a BICAM committee with the Senate, and hopefully we will see the result that would be palatable to both the Moro people and the Filipino people. But even and beyond then, we should, I think, continue to persist and struggle for all-out peace, not only in Mindanao, but also in Burma, in South Thailand, in Sri Lanka, and all the other corners of the world. We have a saying in the Philippines, in Tagalog, sakit ng kalingkingan ay sakit at dama ng buong katawan, which roughly translated means a small wound in your pinky or your little finger is felt by your entire body. It will take your entire body to heal that little finger. So we have to persist and struggle to cure all of those wounds in the other little fingers and corners of this world. Persist in all-out peace, even as my hair now is continuing to gray and thin by the day. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody.